Good morning. My name is K. Umesh Rao. Today's subject is Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979. This chapter is covered under Labor Law 2. In this class, we are discussing Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979. Who are all the interstate migrant workmen? And who is the contractor? Who is a principal employer? Who is a workman? Next, we are discussing registration of certain establishments and its procedures and revocation of registration and licensing of contractors, revocation, suspension, amendment of license, rights of interstate workers, duties of the contractors, duty of the principal employer, and duty of the government. The Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Services Act 1979. This act applies to every establishment in which 5 or more interstate migrant workers are employed on any day of the preceding 12 months. It applies to every contractor who employs 5 or more interstate migrant workers on any day of the preceding 12 months. Now, who are the interstate migrant workmen? Interstate migrant workman means any person who is recruited through a contractor in one state under an agreement for employment in an establishment situated in another state, with or without the knowledge of the principal employer in relation to such establishment. For example, the worker is in Bihar, contractor is in Bihar. Now, the worker has to work in MRPL in Mangalore. So, MRPL is a principal employer, worker is a migrant worker, and contractor is situated in other state. So workmen have to work in an establishment that exists in another state. The employment may be with or without the knowledge of the principal employer in relation to such establishment. Now, who is a contractor? Contractor is a person who undertakes to produce a given result for the establishment. He has to work for the principal employer. To get the work, he wants workmen. So, he employs workmen from other states. He may be independent contractor, he may be an agent, or he may be an employee. The contractor is a person other than a mere supplier of goods or articles for the manufacture. Now, who is the principal employer? Principal employer is a person in relation to any office or department of a government or local authority or head of the office. The principal employer in relation to factory. Who is principal employer in relation to factory? Is the owner of the factory or occupier of the factory. Who is the principal employer in relation to other establishment? Is any person who is responsible, supervisory officer, and he controls the establishment. Now, who is a workman? Workman means any person employed in connection with the work of any establishment. Workman, he may do skilled work, unskilled work, semi-skilled work, manual work, supervisory work, work for hire or reward. Workman does not include a person who is employed in supervisory or administrative capacity. Now, the registration procedure for certain establishment. In this case, we understood that Contractor, he has to work on behalf of principal employer. Now, the registration has to be done for the principal employer. Who is the principal employer? He may be the owner of the factory. He may be the owner of the mine. He may be the government department, or he may do any supervisory work. So, the principal employer of an establishment within a prescribed period, he has to make an application to the registering officer to registration. He has to pay fees for the registration. Principal employer shall not employ any interstate workman unless certificate of registration is issued. Now, who is the registering officer? Registering officer is appointed by the government. His duty is to issue registration certificate for the principal employer. He can entertain any application for registration even after the expiry of period of fixed period. Condition, he should be satisfied that the applicant was prevented from making an application in time. So, sufficient cause should be shown. The registration process, now we got. Registering officer, within a 1 month of an application for registration, he has to register the establishment if the application is complete in all respects, and he has to issue certificate of registration. If the application is not complete, what he will do? The registering officer has to return the application to the principal employer. If the application is not complete, registrar officer has to return the application to the principal employer. The registering officer shall, within 15 days of the receipt of the application to the principal employer, after its return, register the establishment and the registration certificate has to be issued. Now, revocation of registration. If the registering officer is satisfied that registration certificate was obtained by misrepresentation or suppression of fact or any other reasons, registration certificate has to be revoked. The registering officer should give personal hearing to the principal employer before revocation of registration. The registering officer should take prior approval from the government before revocation. Revocation order should be in writing and it should be communicated to the principal employer. Suspension of registration certificate. Registering officer may suspend the operation of registration certificate for a short period and serve the order by registered post acknowledgement due along with the reasons. No principal employer shall employ interstate migrant workmen unless a certificate of registration is issued. Principal employer has to be registered. Now, another person is there, another category is there, contractor. What? Contractor has to be issued a licensing certificate. Who is a contractor? Contractor is a person who undertakes to produce given result for an establishment. He recruits a workman for the establishment. He may be independent contractor, he may be subcontractor, he may be agent, or he may be employee, other than the persons employed in the workman. So, contractor recruits a person in a state, establishment situated in another state as per the license. For example, contractor from Bihar, he recruits migrant workers from Bihar. Worker has to work in MRPL factory situated in Karnataka. So, the licensing officer issue license to the contractors. Licensing is required for Every contractor who employs 5 or more interstate migrant workers on any day of the preceding 12 months. The licensing officers may be appointed by central government as well as state government. Now, revocation of licensing issued to the contractor. If the contractor obtains the license by misrepresentation or suppression of fact, if the contractor failed to comply with the condition of the license, if the contractor contravened the provisions of the act, his license will be revoked. The licensing officer has to revoke the license and forfeit the security furnished by the contractor. Revocation should be in writing. Personal hearing should be given. Suspension of license. Licensing officer, pending such revocation or forfeiture of security amount, order for suspension of operation of license. The licensing officer should communicate to the contractors information about the revocation of license. Amendment of license. The licensing officer may amend a license granted to the contractors. Any person aggrieved by the order issued by the licensing officer regarding revocation or suspension within 30 days from the date of the order communicated to him, he prefer an appeal to the appellate officer. Now, rights of the interstate workers. Interstate workers are entitled with better wages. He is entitled with equal wages for the similar nature and duration of work applicable to local workmen or minimum wages under Minimum Wages Act 1948. All workers are entitled displacement allowance. What is the displacement? For example, I told he is settled in Bihar. He has to come to Karnataka. It is displacement. So, for this purpose of displacement, he should be given allowance. All workers are entitled payment of wages during the period of journey. All workers are entitled suitable residential accommodation where in state where they are working. Worker entitled to free of charge medical facilities. Worker termination of employees, if done, they should not be imposed any liability or penalty. Worker has a right to lodge a complaint within 3 months in case of any accident. Now, duty of the principal employer. First duty is he has to get the registration certificate. Without registration certificate, he cannot appoint any interstate employee. Registration of all principal employers is necessary even if the employee is employed directly or indirectly on any day of the preceding 12 months. Employer has to maintain registers regarding the employees. Principal employer shall nominate a representative to be present at the time of disbursement of wages. Representative has to certify the wages amount paid to the workman. If the principal employer fails to nominate representatives, then he is liable to bear the loss of wages and he is liable for the punishment. Government's duty. What is the government's duty? Government has to appoint inspectors to supervise the implementation of the act. Government has to appoint licensing officers to grant, revoke the registration certificate issued to contractors or principal employers. Government has to appoint licensing officer to grant, suspend license issued to contractors as well as principal employer. Government has to make rules for the implementation of the act. Government has to make provisions for entertaining appeals. And thank you.